The gun shop clerks looked at the old man's worn clothes and decided he couldn't afford their merchandise. At 72, Frank Martinez walked with a slight limp, wore a faded military surplus jacket, and spoke softly when asking to see a rifle he'd once carried in Vietnam. The young employees laughed at his questions, called him Grandpa, and told him to leave unless he was actually buying something. Frank didn't argue. He simply nodded, walked to his truck, and drove away with the quiet dignity he'd maintained for 50 years since returning from war. What the clerks didn't know was that Frank's old jacket carried patches they should have recognized, and that his phone contact list included people who wouldn't tolerate disrespect toward their former brother-in-arms. Welcome to Veteran Stories. Before we continue this powerful story of disrespect, brotherhood, and the moment when ignorance met consequence, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe that respect should be given before it's earned, especially to those who serve, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who deserve better. Morrison's gun shop sat on the outskirts of San Diego, serving military personnel from nearby bases, law enforcement officers, and civilian firearms enthusiasts. The store had been in business for 15 years, building its reputation on quality merchandise and knowledgeable staff who understood the needs of professional shooters. At least, that's what the owner believed about his employees. On this particular Tuesday morning, two young clerks were working the sales floor. Jake Thompson, 24, had been with the store for 8 months and considered himself an expert on tactical firearms despite never having served in the military. His co-worker, Brad Wilson, 22, was newer to the job but equally confident in his knowledge of weapons and his ability to assess which customers were serious buyers. Both men had developed the unfortunate habit of prejudging customers based on appearance, assuming that anyone who didn't look like a typical gun enthusiast was probably wasting their time. When Frank Martinez walked to the front door at 10:30 a.m., the clerks immediately categorized him as a non-buyer. His clothes were old but clean, a faded military surplus jacket that had seen better decades, worn jeans, and boots that suggested manual labor rather than recreational shooting. Frank moved slowly through the store, not with the hesitation of someone unfamiliar with firearms, but with the deliberate pace of someone whose age required careful movement. He stopped at a display case containing military-style rifles and studied them with the focused attention of someone who recognized exactly what he was looking at. Frank approached the counter where Jake was organizing inventory sheets, clearly more interested in his paperwork than in helping customers. "Excuse me," Frank said politely. "Could I take a look at that M16 style rifle in the display case?" Jake looked up with barely concealed irritation. "That's a $2,400 rifle. Old man. You looking to buy or just browse?" Frank was taken aback by the young man's tone, but maintained his composure. "I'd like to examine it, please. I carried one similar to it years ago." Brad overheard the conversation and walked over with a smirk. "Years ago? What? Did you play with toy soldiers back in the day?" Frank's expression remained patient despite the disrespect. "I served in Vietnam. I was hoping to see how the civilian version compares to what we carried." Jake and Brad exchanged glances, clearly skeptical. The old man's story didn't match their preconceptions about Vietnam veterans, who they assumed would be more assertive about their service. "Look, Grandpa," Jake said dismissively, "we're not running a museum here. If you're not buying anything, maybe you should head over to the VFW hall and swap stories with the other old guys." Frank's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "I understand you're busy. I'm genuinely interested in potentially purchasing a rifle. I just wanted to examine the quality and features." Brad laughed outright. "Purchase? With what? Your Social Security check. This isn't Walmart. Old man. These are serious firearms for serious people." Frank looked around the store, noting other customers who were watching the interaction with growing discomfort. A young Marine in civilian clothes had stopped browsing and was paying attention to how the clerks were treating the elderly customer. "Gentlemen," Frank said with quiet dignity, "I served this country for 27 years. I'm not asking for special treatment, just basic courtesy while I consider a purchase." Jake's response revealed the full extent of his ignorance and disrespect. 27 years doing what? Pushing papers at some desk job? "Look, old man, You're holding up paying customers. Either buy something or get out. The Marine customer stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with what he was witnessing. Hey, maybe you guys should mind your own business, Brad interrupted. We know how to handle our customers. Frank realized that continuing the conversation would only result in further humiliation. He straightened his shoulders, maintaining the military bearing that decades of civilian life hadn't erased. I'll be leaving now, Frank said simply. Thank you for your time. As Frank walked toward the door, Jake called after him with a final insult. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Grandpa. Maybe try the pawn shop down the street. They might have something in your price range. Frank stopped briefly at the door, not turning around, then continued his truck without another word. Frank sat in his truck for a few minutes, not from anger but from sadness. 50 years since returning from Vietnam, and he still encountered people who had no understanding of service or sacrifice. He thought about driving home and forgetting the incident, as he'd done countless times before. Instead, he made a phone call. Master Chief Johnson, this is Frank Martinez. The voice on the other end immediately became alert and respectful. Frank, how are you doing? It's been too long. I'm fine, Chief. Listen, I had an experience today that I thought you should know about. Frank described the incident at Morrison's gun shop, not seeking revenge, but simply sharing information about how veterans were being treated by a business that claimed to serve the military community. Those boys don't know who they were talking to, do they? Johnson asked. No, and I didn't tell them. But I thought you and the team should know that this is how they treat older veterans. Johnson was quiet for a moment. Frank, you know we can't let this slide. I'm not asking for anything, Chief. I just thought you should know. We'll handle this appropriately. Give me the address. Master Chief Petty Officer Tom Johnson had served under Frank Martinez during 3 deployments in the 1990s, when Frank was one of the Navy's most respected SEAL officers. Johnson now led an active SEAL team based at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, and he understood exactly who had been disrespected at Morrison's gun shop. Johnson made several phone calls to SEALs who had served with Frank or knew his reputation. Within 30 minutes, he had assembled a group of 12 active duty and recently retired SEALs who were available for an impromptu visit to educate some ignorant gun shop clerks. They weren't going for confrontation or violence. They were going for education about respect, military service, and the consequences of treating veterans with contempt. The 12 SEALs met the base and drove to Morrison's gun shop in 4 vehicles, arriving exactly 1 hour and 3 minutes after Frank had been asked to leave. At 11:33 a.m., 4 black SUVs pulled into Morrison's gun shop parking lot and parked in precise formation. 12 men got out and walked toward the store entrance with a coordinated movement that immediately identified them as military professionals. Jake and Brad noticed the group approaching and assumed they were potential customers who would be interested in high-end tactical equipment. This looked like the kind of clientele they preferred: young, fit, and obviously serious about firearms. The SEALs entered the store in silence, spreading out to the sales area with the spatial awareness that comes from years of tactical training. They didn't speak, didn't touch merchandise, just positioned themselves where they could observe everything that happened. Master Chief Johnson approached the counter, where Jake was still working on inventory. Good morning, Johnson said with professional courtesy. We're looking for information about how you treat your customers here. Jake brightened, assuming this was a group of military buyers who might make significant purchases. Absolutely. We specialize in tactical equipment for military and law enforcement. What can I show you? Johnson looked around the store at his teammates, then back at Jake. Actually, we're here about a customer you had earlier today, an older gentleman who was interested in looking at rifles. Jake's expression shifted slightly, but he maintained his sales-focused demeanor. Oh, that old guy? Yeah, he was just wasting our time. Wanted to handle expensive merchandise, but obviously wasn't buying anything. The temperature in the store seemed to drop several degrees. Johnson stepped closer to the counter, his voice remaining calm but carrying a new edge. Tell me exactly how you treated this customer. Brad joined the conversation, still unaware of the gravity of the situation. Look, we get a lot of looky-loose who want to play with guns they can't afford. The old man was asking questions about Vietnam-era rifles like he was some kind of expert, but he obviously didn't know what he was talking about. One of the other SEALs, Petty Officer First Class Davis, spoke for the first time. What makes you think he didn't know what he was talking about? Jake laughed, still clueless about who he was addressing. Come on, the guy was probably just some wannabe who read about the war online. Real veterans don't usually come in here asking basic questions about rifles they supposedly carried. Johnson pulled out his phone and showed Jake a photograph. Is this the man you're talking about? The photo showed Frank Martinez in Navy dress uniform, wearing the ribbons and decorations that told the story of an extraordinary military career. Jake studied the photo, beginning to realize that something was very wrong with his assessment of the morning's customer. Who is this guy? Jake asked, his confidence starting to waver. This, Johnson said with quiet intensity, is Master Chief Petty Officer Frank Martinez, Navy SEALs retired. 27 years of service, including multiple combat deployments in Vietnam, Grenada, Panama, and the Persian Gulf. Medal of Honor recipient. Silver Star with oak leaf clusters. Bronze Star with V device and 3 oak leaf clusters. The gun shop went completely silent. Johnson continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak about Frank Martinez's service. Master Chief Martinez didn't just carry an M16 in Vietnam. He carried it through operations that are still classified. He trained the men who trained the men who trained us. He's a legend in the SEAL community. Brad's face had gone pale as the magnitude of their mistake became apparent. When he came in here this morning, Johnson continued, he wasn't some old man wasting your time. He was a warrior who earned his right to respect through service you can't imagine. And you treated him like garbage. Jake tried to recover. We didn't know. He didn't say anything about being decorated, or he shouldn't have to, interrupted another SEAL. Every veteran who walks through that door deserves basic courtesy, regardless of what they're wearing or how much money they might spend. Johnson looked around at his teammates, then back at the clerks. Master Chief Martinez called to tell us about his experience here. Not because he wanted revenge, but because he thought we should know how this business treats older veterans. For the next 20 minutes, the SEALs provided Jake and Brad with an education about military service, veteran respect, and the meaning of Frank Martinez's career. They didn't raise their voices, didn't make threats, but their presence and knowledge made an impression that would last forever. Master Chief Martinez volunteered for missions that most people couldn't survive, Johnson explained. He saved lives, led men through impossible situations, and earned recognition that most military personnel never achieve. When he retired, he chose to live quietly, without seeking attention for his service. Petty Officer Davis added, the fact that he doesn't walk around talking about his decorations makes him more worthy of respect, not less. True warriors don't need to prove their credentials to earn basic courtesy. Jake, who had been listening with growing embarrassment, finally found his voice. What can we do? How can we make this right? Johnson looked at his teammates, then back at Jake. You can learn from this. You can treat every customer with respect, especially older customers who might be veterans. And you can understand that service doesn't end when someone takes off the uniform. The store owner, Mike Morrison, had been called by a customer who witnessed the morning's incident and had arrived during the SEAL's visit. He listened to the full story with growing horror at how his employees had represented his business. Morrison immediately apologized to the SEALs and asked for Frank Martinez's contact information so he could make a personal apology. He also made it clear that his employees' behavior was unacceptable and wouldn't be tolerated. Jake, Brad, Morrison said with barely controlled anger, you've embarrassed me, embarrassed this business, and disrespected a genuine American hero. This is not how we treat customers, especially veterans. The two clerks, now fully understanding the magnitude of their mistake, looked at each other with expressions of shame and regret. Johnson addressed Morrison directly. Sir, Master Chief Martinez isn't looking for special treatment or compensation. He just wanted to be treated with basic courtesy. Your store serves a military community, and your employees need to understand what that means. Morrison nodded emphatically. They will understand, or they won't be working here. The SEALs prepared to leave, their educational mission accomplished. As they headed for the door, Johnson turned back to Jake and Brad. "One more thing," he said. "Master Chief Martinez is 72 years old. He's earned the right to be treated with respect everywhere he goes. If we hear about anything like this happening again, we'll be back. And next time, we might not be as polite." That afternoon, Mike Morrison drove to Frank Martinez's home with a personal apology and an invitation for Frank to return to the store as his guest. Morrison had researched Frank's service record and was horrified by how his employees had treated such a distinguished veteran. Frank accepted Morrison's apology graciously and appreciated the store owner's effort to make things right. But what impressed him most was Morrison's commitment to training his employees about veteran recognition and respect. "Mr. Martinez," Morrison said, "I want to make sure this never happens again to you or any other veteran. Would you be willing to help me train my staff about military service and veteran respect?" Frank considered this carefully. "I'm not looking for publicity or recognition, but if you think it would help your employees understand how to better serve the military community, I'm willing to help." Over the following months, Frank became an informal consultant to Morrison's gun shop, helping train employees about military service, veteran experiences, and the importance of treating all customers with dignity regardless of their appearance or apparent financial status. Jake and Brad, initially resentful about being publicly corrected, gradually came to understand the significance of their mistake. Through Frank's patient instruction and stories shared by military customers, they learned about the diversity of veteran experiences and the importance of respect over assumptions. Jake, in particular, was transformed by learning about Frank's actual service record. "Master Chief," he said during one of Frank's training sessions, "I can't believe I treated you the way I did. I was ignorant and disrespectful, and I'm ashamed of my behavior." Frank looked at the young man who had called him Grandpa and told him to leave the store. "Son, ignorance can be corrected through education. Disrespect can be forgiven when it's followed by genuine understanding. What matters now is how you treat veterans going forward." Brad also apologized and committed to learning about military service and veteran recognition. The store implemented new training procedures for all employees, emphasizing customer service that honored the military community they served. 6 months after the incident, Morrison's gun shop had become known throughout the San Diego military community as a business that truly understood and respected veteran customers. Frank's quiet involvement in employee training had created a culture of appreciation for military service that attracted customers from across the region. The SEALs who had responded to Frank's initial treatment became regular customers, not just because of the store's merchandise, but because of the respectful treatment they and other veterans received. Master Chief Johnson, who had organized the initial response, brought his team to the store for a formal recognition ceremony honoring Frank's contributions to veteran education and respect. "Master Chief Martinez," Johnson said during the ceremony, "your response to disrespect showed us something important. Instead of seeking revenge or harboring resentment, you chose education and improvement. That's leadership that continues long after retirement." Frank accepted the recognition, but insisted that the real victory was in the changed attitudes of Morrison's employees and their enhanced service to the veteran community. 2 years after the incident, Morrison's gun shop had become a case study in how businesses could better serve military customers. Frank's training program had been adopted by other firearms retailers throughout California, spreading awareness about veteran respect and proper customer service. Jake and Brad, now thoroughly educated about military service, had become advocates for veteran recognition. They often shared their story about disrespecting a Medal of Honor recipient, and the lesson they learned about not judging people by their appearance. "The most important thing Master Chief Martinez taught us," Jake told a group of new employees, "is that you can't tell someone's story by looking at their clothes or their age. Every customer deserves respect, especially veterans who earned it through service we can't imagine." Frank continued visiting the store occasionally, not for special treatment, but to see how the culture of respect had developed. He was pleased to observe employees treating all customers with dignity, regardless of their appearance or apparent ability to make large purchases. The SEALs who had responded to defend Frank's honor discovered that their action had strengthened their own understanding of military brotherhood. The incident reminded them that their obligation to fellow warriors extended far beyond active duty service. "What we learned from Master Chief Martinez," Johnson told his team during a debrief, is that the most powerful response to disrespect isn't retaliation. It's education that creates lasting change. The 12 SEALs who had walked into Morrison's gun shop that day maintained contact with Frank, visiting him regularly and ensuring that his contributions to military service were remembered and honored by younger generations. Frank's quiet dignity in the face of disrespect, followed by his commitment to education rather than revenge, became an example that influenced how the SEAL community approached similar situations. 5 years after being asked to leave Morrison's gun shop, Frank Martinez returned as a guest of honor for the store's annual Veterans Day celebration. The business had become one of the most respected firearms retailers in Southern California, known throughout the military community for its understanding and appreciation of veteran customers. Jake and Brad, now store managers themselves, personally thanked Frank for the patience and wisdom he'd shown in transforming their attitudes about military service and customer respect. "Master Chief," Jake said, "you could have destroyed our careers and gotten us fired. Instead, you chose to teach us. That's a level of character I'm still trying to live up to." Frank looked around the store where he'd once been dismissed as a worthless old man, now filled with veterans and active duty military personnel who were treated with the respect they deserved. "Son," Frank said, "the measure of a person isn't in the mistakes they make, but in how they respond to learning better. You and Brad prove that ignorance can become wisdom when it's guided by willingness to change." The store's transformation from a place that disrespected veterans to one that honored them had become a testament to the power of education over retaliation and the importance of never abandoning brothers in arms. Frank Martinez never sought recognition for his Medal of Honor service, never demanded special treatment for his 27 years in the Navy SEALs, and never expected his sacrifices to be rewarded with automatic respect. He simply wanted to be treated with basic human dignity while considering a purchase at a gun shop. When that respect was denied, Frank's response revealed the character that had earned him the military's highest honors: patience instead of anger, education instead of retaliation, and a commitment to improvement rather than revenge. The 12 SEALs who answered Frank's quiet call for support understood that brotherhood means standing up for those who stood for everyone. Their intervention wasn't about intimidation. It was about education, respect, and ensuring that those who serve their country receive the dignity they've earned. Morrison's gun shop was transformed not by punishment, but by understanding, proving that ignorance can become wisdom when people are willing to learn from their mistakes and committed to doing better. So now I ask you, have you ever witnessed someone being disrespected because of their appearance or age, only to discover they possess extraordinary experiences or achievements? Have you seen the power of education to transform attitudes better than retaliation ever could? Share their story in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. Because at Veteran Stories, we believe that every person deserves respect, that service continues to matter long after uniforms are retired, and that the strongest response to ignorance is patient teaching that creates lasting change. Subscribe if stories like this matter to you, because every community needs people who will stand up for those who stood for all of us, and who understand that true strength lies in building bridges rather than burning them.